we're going to go be very thorough and just try to make the best decision for this organization, whatever that entails.
That was Texans general manager Nick Caserio just over 2 weeks ago as he was outlining his plans to find the next head coach of the Texans. We will get into all that and more tonight here on the Fox 26 Sports Stream. We appreciate you stopping by, whether you found us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, fox26houston.com. We do it every Monday just after 7 o'clock. As always, I'm Sal Manine, sports producer here at Fox 26, and we got a lot to get to because it looks like the Texans don't have a lot more interviewing to do, as it appears, reading the tea leaves, they have finally narrowed down their list to the final handful of candidates for the head coaching position. The team announced today they have completed interviews with Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles, Brian Flores, who was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins for the last 3 seasons, Kevin O'Connell, who is currently the offensive coordinator for the LA Rams. Yes, those Rams who are going to the Super Bowl. Josh McCown, yes, the same Josh McCown who has yet to coach in any capacity in the NFL or NCAA, but does have extensive experience as an 18-year NFL veteran at the QB position. And in the case of Gannon, McCown, and Flores, those were all in-person interviews, and those were all the second interviews for each of those candidates, meaning it looks like that is the final 4, that one of those gentlemen is in all likelihood going to be the next head coach of the Houston Texans. Now, when this whole thing started, like I said, a little over 2 weeks ago, after the final week of the season, when the Texans decided to pull the trigger and fire David Culley after just 1 year, it looked like the clubhouse leader, if the Texans could get him, was Brian Flores, who a lot of people thought should never have been let go in Miami. Not only did he do well there, but was coming off back-to-back winning seasons, reportedly had clashes with ownership and rubbed some people the wrong way in terms of his demeanor and how he liked to run things inside the building. But by all accounts, he was the number 1 free agent on the board, and it was more a question of, well, could the Texans get this guy even if they want him, and even though they have ties because of the New England Patriots with Brian Flores and Nick Caserio, Jack Easterby, it was widely thought, oh, well, this is the guy who all the teams in the NFL are going to want. But so far, as we've started to see now several head coaching vacancies be filled, Brian Flores' name is still out there. And now we know that the Texans have spoken to him more than once about being the head coach of the Texans, and their interview today was in person, which all indicates he has to be one of the finalists for the job. Again, experience as a head coach, coming off back-to-back winning campaigns, spent a decade and a half in New England, so he has an established relationship with Nick Caserio, with Vice President of Football Operations for the Texans, Jack Easterby. He owns 4 Super Bowl rings from his time in New England. Now, you can look at all of that and go, well, on paper, that looks like the guy. You hear nothing but good things about him around the league, and a lot of people up in New England, certainly with how things have changed there over the last few seasons. And as Bill Belichick is certainly getting closer to the end of his career, a lot of people wondering up north, does Brian Flores come home at some point if nobody hires him to be a head coach? But if you're the Texans, is that perhaps a knock, as we've talked about with everything that we've heard from the Texans over the last several years about not wanting to be Patriots South, yet they keep hiring guys with Patriots ties. Do you not want to go that way? Well, at least on paper, Brian Flores seems to check every other box. And yes, you can say what you want about he's not Tom Brady and he's not Bill Belichick, and how many other Patriots assistants are going to have to get jobs and subsequently lose them before the league learns their lesson. But you could make a case that Brian Flores thus far is the most successful of the Belichick disciples, given the fact that he was given such a bad roster when he initially took that job there in Miami, and for all intents and purposes, really overachieved and got those guys to play hard game in and game out. And so he's still available. We also know that there are other teams reportedly still interested in him. He's reportedly going to interview tomorrow for the New Orleans Saints job. So if the Texans are in fact close to making a move and Brian Flores is their guy, given the familiarity between he and the general manager, you would expect to see that happen perhaps any moment now, if not certainly in the coming days. As for the other guys who received second interviews, Jonathan Gannon is a guy who everywhere he's gone and interviewed in this head coaching cycle, all the reports afterwards are that he was absolutely amazing in the interview process. Knocked it out of the park, home run, slam dunk, whatever superlative you want to throw into it. He's only 39, just turned 39 years old a few weeks ago, and already he's skyrocketing up teams' boards in terms of the interest that they have for this guy to be a head coach at some point. Was the Eagles DC this past season after spending the 3 years before that as the Colts defensive backs coach. The Eagles finished statistically with a top 10 defense in 2021. And before that, again, he has familiarity with the AFC South Division. And just like Brian Flores, he's a candidate who several other teams have interviewed and who have expressed interest in. So this is different than a year ago this time when, if you're a Texans fan, you're going, all right, the Texans are interviewing this David Culley guy. All right, he's picking up traction, but why does no one else in the league want to talk to this guy? What magic secret do the Texans know that nobody else in the league does? In the case of Flores, in the case of Gannon, and in the case of Kevin O'Connell, other teams are involved and at least have their interest piqued with the resume of all these guys. Like Nick Caserio, Jonathan Gannon does come from a scouting background. He did spend a few seasons in the scouting department for the Rams. So there's at least some familiarity perhaps with how the head coach and the general manager view talent, acquisition, developing that talent, all that kind of stuff. But again, by all accounts, not just reports involving the Texans, but every team that has spoken to Jonathan Gannon about being a head coach thus far has had nothing but great things to say. Kevin O'Connell was in with the Texans for what is reportedly just the first meeting. There was a report from Adam Schefter that sometime last week the Texans did interview Kevin O'Connell. Mark Vandermeer, who is the radio voice of the Texans, tweeted out earlier today, though, that this was, in fact, O'Connell's first sit-down with the Houston Texans. He's obviously pretty busy right now since his team is still playing football, one of only two teams remaining after the Rams were able to complete the comeback last night in the NFC Championship game over the San Francisco 49ers. He's been the OC the last 2 years for the Rams. He does not call the plays in LA. Everybody knows that that's Sean McVay's thing, and that so much of what goes on offensively with the Rams, who even before Matthew Stafford arrived this year, were still able to put up impressive offensive numbers. And we've all seen how things have gone with Jared Goff the past few seasons. So the fact that the Rams were at one point able to get to a Super Bowl with Jared Goff tells you a lot about their offensive scheme and their style and their approach to the game. And so this is another one of those instances where, are you getting a guy who was integral to all that success and what was going on, or are you getting a guy who was just in the room? And just as we have talked about at length about all the Patriots guys who, it's nice that you are around Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, but how much of what you know and what you want to do was really more those two individuals. In this case, another Sean McVay guy, how much of it is, all right, can you replicate what Sean McVay did? Or was that an instance of, there's a reason Sean McVay and the Rams have had the success that they've had? I will point out that a few years ago, people were saying all those things about Zach Taylor when the Cincinnati Bengals hired him. The big joke around the league was, if you had even had a cup of coffee at some point in your life with Sean McVay, NFL teams wanted to interview you, wanted to hire you. And there were reports of scouts and different people around the league questioning Zach Taylor, and this is a guy who's getting a head coaching job. That's really just somebody riding Sean McVay's coattails. Well, a lot of those people have been silenced in the last 24 hours because Zach Taylor is the other coach who is still playing football right now as the leader of the Cincinnati Bengals, your AFC champions and other representatives in the Super Bowl. So we always talk about it's a copycat league, and in the case of everything that the LA Rams have been doing offensively, and you can tie Kyle Shanahan from the 49ers into that whole McVay tree and that they all kind of come from a similar school. Well, if that's what the copycat league is, there's a reason that not just the Texans, but so many teams have wanted to interview Kevin O'Connell. And so in this instance, we will see if he perhaps does get a second interview at some point. And again, if you're the Texans and O'Connell is your guy, do you have to perhaps wait until after the Super Bowl to make that official? Or is this just a case of trying to interview the hot name and somebody who's tied to the McVay-Shanahan tree before you move on to one of the candidates who you do perhaps want? And again, O'Connell, like Gannon, like Brian Flores, other teams have interviewed him and have expressed interest. And even the Jacksonville Jaguars were actually unable today to get an interview with Kevin O'Connell because of how they've changed the rules in recent years. If you don't put in a request to speak with a coach during the initial go round or the initial start of a coaching search, then once you get to conference championship weekend, once that is passed, those 2 weeks before the Super Bowl, you're not allowed to put in new requests to interview guys. So Kevin O'Connell's obviously a very hot name right now, and you're only going to hear more and more about that as we get closer and closer to the big game. Then the last finalist, at least if you're reading between the tea leaves, who the Texans interviewed for a second time, interviewed in person, and from everything we know, they are the only team that has interviewed this individual to be the head coach of their franchise, is Josh McCown. And this would certainly qualify as an outside the box hire because he does not have any experience as an NFL or collegiate coach, position coach, coordinator, head coach, anything. He has been a volunteer assistant coach at various points over the last several years, even while he was still playing in the NFL, mostly as a backup quarterback. He would, when he had time early in the week, or if there was a bye, or there were a couple instances where he had not yet signed with a team. In fact, in one case, he had even retired and thought he was going into coaching high school football full-time or on a regular basis before then getting a call from QB needing teams and getting back into the league. But outside of a few instances of working with some high school teams, and specifically in a couple cases helping to coach his son's teams who are high school players, and I believe his eldest son is now at CU Boulder playing for the Buffaloes. Outside of that, this would be fairly unprecedented as far as somebody going from playing in the league just a year or two ago to all of a sudden being the head coach. We see guys all the time after they retire, they move in and there's some type of special assistant, an apprentice, maybe even a position coach, but to go from playing all the way to the big chair does not happen in today's day and age. I think I read something that Norm Van Brocklin back in like the 60s was the last time a guy went from retiring to within just a year or two, the next year being the head coach. And if you're the Texans, what right have you earned, or what benefit of the doubt have you earned that people are going to go, all right, yeah, that works. That's a decision that you should make, is to hire a guy who on paper does not have any experience. Yes, he's been in the league for almost 2 decades as a player, and a lot of what you do as a backup quarterback, or especially if you are that third quarterback on the roster, which he found himself as several times over the last few years of his career, that you could say, all right, that's almost like a de facto assistant coaching position. But there is part of me that has to wonder, if Josh McCown wants to be an NFL head coach and these jobs are highly coveted and there's only 32 of them, why hasn't he pursued coaching at the NFL or collegiate level in some other capacity prior to now? Why, after he immediately retires, if you know you want to be a head coach at some point, does he not jump into coaching in some capacity at the D1 or NFL level, even if it is as an assistant, even if it's not being the main QB coach? Can you be some type of assistant quarterbacks coach? Or we know a lot of times teams will have an assistant position coach, multiple guys coaching at one position. Now, the reports out there have said that, well, after playing and being in professional football for 2 decades, he wanted time to spend with his family, to see his kids play. And as I mentioned, one of his sons has already become a D1 football player himself. He has another son who's in high school football now. All that is certainly understandable. But if you want one of these jobs that people will work decades trying to get, then why do you not jump into that right away? Or if you say, I need time away to go spend time with my family, how are you now ready just a year later to take a job that, forget 40 hours a week? Being an NFL head coach is a 70, 80 plus hours a week job. And obviously he knows from his years being a player what goes into the grind of an NFL season, but it's a lot different when all of a sudden you're the guy at the top, when you are, for all intents and purposes, the CEO, the face of the franchise. You are the name and the face who most of the general public, and especially in the case of the Texans, who as of right now does not look like they have a franchise quarterback, that still trying to figure out what do they have in Davis Mills, and likely Deshaun Watson is out on his way out of Houston whenever the legal situation is resolved on that end. So the most visible person that the public is going to see, and certainly here in Houston, would be the head coach. And you're taking a guy who has never even come close to sitting in that chair. So it's one thing if you want to interview Josh McCown for a position coach, maybe even a coordinator spot, but to all of a sudden honestly be ready to turn the reins of your franchise. And I mean, don't forget, NFL teams are basically multi-billion-dollar companies, and you're just going to hand the keys over to a guy who has never been in any type of management situation before. Certainly is going to make people raise a lot of eyebrows and scratch their head. So we'll see what happens. Maybe it's just a matter of they like Josh McCown. They want to get him used to this type of thing going through the interview process and try to entice him to join the staff in a lesser role, not as the head coach, but all right, you can be the QB's coach or maybe work up to OC or something like that. But it would turn the football world upside down if an NFL team seriously gave the head coaching position to a guy with no experience. Now, again, maybe the Texans know something we don't, and this type of outside the box thinking is just what they need to turn around a franchise that has so many questions and so many what ifs and has so far to go in terms of its rebuild, that Nick Caserio a year from now, 2-3 years from now, ends up looking like a genius, and more NFL teams start to do this. But when something hasn't ever been done in the modern NFL, there's generally a reason for that. And Josh McCown, by all accounts, loved by all his teammates. People have nothing but good things to say about him around the league. And certainly being a quarterback, especially a backup quarterback, lends itself to having to have that keen eye, to be very analytical, very deliberate in your thought process, all the types of things that would help one become a coach at some point in their future. All of that's well and good. But again, if Josh McCown is the answer to everything that ails the Texans or really any NFL team that's struggling, why have we never heard stories prior to this about, oh, you think Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan are doing some innovative things on offense? Wait till you see what the backup quarterback for the Texans, Eagles, Browns, Cardinals, go down the list of everyone that Josh McCown's played for. Josh McCown really has something that's going to set the league on fire. It's just hard to see from the outside looking in. And so maybe a few weeks ago when Nick Caserio had his news conference discussing the dismissal of David Culley and where he wanted to go with the franchise, remember he brought up unprompted the comparisons between the Pittsburgh Steelers when they initially hired Mike Tomlin, who was not a name that people were very familiar with outside of the football world. And all of a sudden he goes on to have a Hall of Fame coaching career. It has never had a losing season in a decade and a half as the helm of the Pittsburgh Steelers. A lot of people thought, oh, is this him, Nick Caserio, greasing the wheels for Gerard Mayo? Maybe it was him greasing the wheels for Josh McCown. But right now, it's just hard to see how a guy who prior to November of 2020, which is when Josh McCown joined the Texans as a third string quarterback, really had no interactions or anything to do with this franchise. And now you're talking about less than a year and a half later, this guy could be the head coach of the team. So we will certainly keep you updated on everything in the Texans coaching search. And as always, make sure you are following us online, fox26houston.com, and certainly following our sports director, Mark Berman. You can find him on Twitter. He is at Mark Berman, Fox26. All right, before we wrap up the Texans, let's just hear one more from Nick Caserio about what he was exactly thinking as far as how he wanted this process to play out, what his plan was in terms of finding candidates when he was going to start this head coaching search, which looks now like it is starting to wind down. Here's Nick Caserio from a couple weeks ago.
I would say I don't think anybody should assume anything. I think we're going to be, very deliberate. I'll be very deliberate with this process. The most important thing is just finding, I would say, the best fit for this organization. Again, there's probably 1,000 things that go into that, John. So for me to kind of articulate one or two, I don't think is fair. But again, there's a myriad of things that this role, and again, it's all about the job description of what do you want from that person, what do you want from that individual. I mean, there's so many things that go into it. So I would say I wouldn't assume anything. I think we're going to go be very thorough and just try to make the best decision for this organization, whatever that entails.
So as one would expect from an NFL front office executive, saying a lot without actually really saying anything. So if you had told me on January 14th, when Nick Caserio held that news conference, that Josh McCown might seriously be the head coach of the Texans, I would have thought you were crazy. Yet here we are. And maybe this all becomes moot and they do hire Brian Flores, who everything we saw in Miami was legit, and he knows how to get the most out of teams. And he had that team playing very good defense, which is, if you're a team like the Texans that's in the midst of a rebuild, something like a strong defensive identity certainly couldn't hurt. But the Texans are going to have to really get this one right, because as a lot of people pointed out to Nick Caserio on January 14th, general managers sometimes get to choose two head coaches. Usually they don't get to pick a third. In that case, it's you who are being shown the door if your second head coach does not work out. So we will see how all of that plays out. All right, I want to check in on the Rockets before we get out of here. They are on the court as we speak at Toyota Center, taking on the Warriors. 4 minutes left in the first quarter. It is 17-16 Rockets. Right now, we will, of course, have those highlights for you tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. Rockets trying to snap a 10-game losing streak inside Toyota Center. The last time they won a game at home was December 8th. That was when James Harden made his return with the Brooklyn Nets. There was no Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving in that game, and the Rockets played one of their best games of the season and were able to beat Harden in Brooklyn. Now they're trying to get their first win in 10 attempts since that contest, playing inside the Toyota Center. Christian Wood and Kevin Porter Jr. both in action for Houston tonight. Wood was out of practice yesterday. He's been dealing with migraines, which caused him to miss practice a few days even before that, but he's able to play. And Kevin Porter Jr., who was sick and they thought it's not COVID related. Then he had to enter health and safety protocols over the weekend. He was cleared this afternoon and he is playing. So that's where the Rockets find themselves right now, and we will keep you updated on that. tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. As for the best basketball team in the city of Houston, it is your U of H Cougars, who moved up to 6th in the Associated Press Top 25 poll this week. 10 wins in a row for Kelvin Sampson's team, still unbeaten in American Athletic Conference play. Obviously, they're not going to play anybody else the rest of the regular season that was of quite the same ilk as some of the teams they played in the non-conference, like a Wisconsin and Alabama or Virginia. But to lose arguably your two best players, certainly Marcus Sasser was on his way to maybe even an All-American campaign, but certainly looked to be the front runner for American Athletic Conference Player of the Year before he went down with a season-ending injury. And then Tremont Mark, who Kelvin Sampson called the best playmaker on the team and who everybody was anticipating to have a huge breakout sophomore season, to lose both those guys to season-ending surgery and still find a way to keep racking up the wins is impressive and worthy of a tip of the cap. So that's what's going on with U of H. They're back in action Wednesday night at home. They host Tulane. Then Sunday, they visit Cincinnati. Every game the rest of the regular season, U of H should be favored in, barring some kind of injury or something fluky like that happening. But Kelvin Sampson firmly entrenched in the conversation for National Coach of the Year with what he's been able to do with the Cougars. So as always, we will have the latest on U of H, the Rockets, all that and more on Fox 26 News at 9. Before we get out, we do want to bring up one thing in case you missed it over the weekend. If you're a fan of the Astros, if you're a fan of the Sugarland Skeeters, well, hang on to any paraphernalia or merchandise you might have, because the Skeeters are no more. The Astros AAA team officially rebranded over the weekend at Constellation Field. Here's Mark Berman with what went down at a very interesting and eventful day down there in Sugarland.
5,672 fans were at Constellation Field for the Astros' official rebranding of AAA Sugarland to the Space Cowboys. Each fan was charged just $1 to get in, and in typical Astros fashion, the money goes to the Astros Charitable Foundation. The Astros unveiled the team's new colors, uniforms, and logos, and of course a new mascot in Orion. So why the Astros choose the name Space Cowboys?
One of the great things about minor league baseball is teams generally go with really fun and creative names, especially to kind of wrap their arms around community. And we had this really unique opportunity. We wanted an identity that reflect the connection to the Astros family, with the team just being 23 miles away, but also something that was unique, that represented the values of Sugarland. Vibrant, progressive, growing, family-oriented. That's really where the inspiration came from.
Sugarland manager Mickey Story was wearing some special shoes for the occasion.
I love it. I think it's exciting. I think it's a good day for baseball. We're getting close. We're right around the corner. To be moving forward with Sugarland as the new affiliate of the Astros after a year as being the Skeeters, I think this starts a new path in history. The colors are beautiful. The uniforms come out really nice. I think it's nothing but exciting and nothing but good stuff for the game of baseball.
The first time fans can see the Space Cowboys wearing the new uniforms in action will be during 2 exhibition games against the Astros on March 28th at Constellation Field and at Minute Maid Park the following day. Mark Berman, Fox 26 Sports.
As always, for all the latest updates on the Houston sports scene, make sure you are following Mark on Twitter. He is at Mark Berman, Fox 26. We will have the latest from Toyota Center tonight on Fox 26 News at 9. For all of us here at Fox 26, I'm Salmonine. We'll see you again next Monday night. Take care.